I feel very privileged to be able to speak here. I'm not a security researcher. I'm working at the University of Technology in Vienna. Most of the thing I'm doing is I'm working on user interface design, game design, experience design, stuff like that. And I'm giving a first semester course that introduces people to all kinds of aspects of technology in respect to society, like copyright and privacy, security, and stuff like that. And doing that, I stumbled over that eVoting thing, and I looked at it through the eyes of an interface designer and experience designer and technology designer, and also as a computer scientist, which is my background. And I found a number of aspects that were quite interesting and that I didn't find discussed widely. So there's the subtitle of various aspects of a quite complicated discussion, because I think that what happened in the last couple of years in the field of eVoting has complicated the discussion considerably. This will probably be a controversial talk, so I hope we can have a lot of discussion afterwards, and I hope you don't get your axe and throw them at me or something like that. So, my name is Peter Burgerthofer. I'm from the Design and Assessment of Technology Institute at the Faculty of Informatics, Vienna University of Technology. And I'm going to talk about democratic elections, and it's a good starting point to remind ourselves that democratic elections have two basic principles, that is, they are free and fair. So what that means is basically that the voter can cast a ballot by themselves, secretly and free of influence and stuff like that. In Europe, this is also turned around, and it's said that you not only have the right to do so, we should take care that you do so. So we try to hinder you to sell your vote, for example. The voter should be free of leverage in active voting as well as in passive voting rights, the same number of equally weighted votes for each voter, and the transparency of the election day procedures, e.g. the setup and the counting and stuff like that. So this is what is packed into the free and fair properties of democratic elections. Also, it's interesting to see democratic elections as a single point of failure in a democracy. So it's the subsystem of democracy. If this subsystem fails, the whole of democracy fails. You can make a democracy fail by forging elections, by making election fraud happen. So I'm going to talk about eVoting. There's a number of things that are associated with eVoting, like web polls, or internet elections, online voting. The people in Estonia do that. They're really brave. You can ask me afterwards what I think of them otherwise. Especially in the light of the recent denial of service attacks that happened in Estonia, which put that in a new light for me. Electronic voting machines, there are online electronic voting machines, offline electronic voting machines, and of course electronic ballot systems in rooms like that, or in the parliament where people press a button and it's collected automatically. Then there's the aspect of something like networked polling stations, and I'm only going to talk about this one aspect, the electronic voting machines, because this is the one aspect that is in the discussion at mostly in the discussion at the moment. And also, this is what it seems, there's a political discussion in Austria whether we should get voting machines, electronic voting. They even discuss about internet elections. Okay, so electronic voting machines. This is a wonderful example. I wouldn't trust this machine too much personally. WinVote, it says, so it probably runs under Windows, but that's just a starter. So electronic voting machines are known, or have made themselves known recently in the last couple of years because of many technical problems, because of, especially in this case, the political entanglements, and they have spawned a number of conspiracy theories. So there was much attention on the debug machine, so we'll concentrate for the technical aspects, maybe on debug machines, but also on other samples. In the discussion about electronic votings, of course you have pro-arguments and contra-arguments. So the people who are for electronic voting, they say, we want to see the higher voter participation. Electronic voting is cheaper, you have the results faster. The moment you close the last polling station, you have the results of the whole election. You have no manual counting errors. As we know, manually counting the votes introduces a certain rate of error, human error. You have simpler access to the voting machines, it's potentially more accessible. You can, of course, build voting stations that are highly accessible for all kind of challenged or disabled people. They say you have no more invalid votes, which is a really interesting argument. Of course, you can build electronic voting in a way so that you cannot cast invalid votes. But the problem is it a right to cast an invalid vote? But that's a different discussion. And this is especially an interesting point. Of course, there are new possibilities. There are people dreaming of dissipating information about ongoing elections during the ongoing election. So then you have the arguments against e-voting. There's, of course, the insecurity of technology and the human nature as counter-arguments. You have a loss of transparency and exposure of the secrecy. You have new possibilities for manipulation through the use of a technology that is manipulatable. Is that a word? I don't know. And to contrast the cheaper argument, the argument against e-voting is that it's more expensive. And I basically will look at two arguments from each side. And let's start with the argument that it's cheaper. Now that's an argument that you heard a lot about 4 or 5 years ago. Since then there have been a number of trial runs for electronic voting in European countries, of course in the US. And there are a number of results. So one is in Canada, the chief electoral officer came to the conclusion that electronic voting costs as much as 25% more than regular voting. What is interesting here is that they set an e-voting moratorium that will remain in place indefinitely because of the problems they had with electronic votings. Marcel Blanchard said that electronic voting machines do not offer sufficient guarantees of transparency and security to ensure the integrity of the vote. That's another part. What is interesting here is that in a very large example, they came to the conclusion that it's actually more expensive, and that's not just for one election. What is very interesting is there are estimates that it's actually 3 times the cost per ballot for electronic voting. And that's an organization that is not against electronic voting itself. They are for clear ethics for electronic voting. But there is another aspect of being cheaper or more expensive, and that is what happened in the Netherlands recently. Following a report from an independent fact-finding commission on the reform of the election procedures, the Dutch government has decided to rework the regulation on which the license for a special kind of voting machines, the NEDAP working machine, was based. As an immediate measure, the license was revoked. 8,290 machines bought cannot be used anymore. So this is money that flew out the window and is not going to come back anymore. So there is an aspect in e-voting that makes it very expensive right now, and that is we don't have the infrastructure, we have to set it up, and there's a lot of error to happen. There's a lot of things that we're going to throw away again until we find a way to do it, if there is one. So let's look at another aspect, the insecurity of technology. Of course, this is probably the most interesting aspect here, but it's also the aspect which I'm most reluctant to discuss because you have way more idea about what I'm talking here. Okay, so the debug machines are, for example, have been banned in California because the security was so bad. And one of the reasons why the security was so bad is because you can open them with a hotel minibar key. So that's, Boing Boing posted this, can be opened with a hotel minibar key. And actually, you can see that. You go to the Diebold webpage and you find the AccuVote TS and the keys with which you can open them. And the funny thing is, on this website, you can actually see the profile of the key. So you can use that to duplicate that key. And you can buy the uncut key. Now, today it looks like that. They changed that. And you can buy the uncut key from like office furniture supply stores and stuff like that. So you have the key to open the machine. Now the question is, if you open the machine, the hardware, does this is this a security risk? As you probably know, the source code for these particular machines leaked into the internet, which is a very interesting fact. And it was analyzed by A.V. Rubin and his students and a couple of other people. And they showed that this voting system is far below even the most minimal security standards applicable in other contexts, like for e.g. gambling. So they found, for example, a line like that. Define des key, des and the key. And the interesting thing is not only that the key is defined in the source code, which is of course a fallacy, but also that they use des, DES. And DES is cracked, I don't know, 10 years now, and this is younger. So this is really ridiculous what is happening here. That's a voting machine. That's a machine for a process that is a single point of failure in our democracy, and they do stuff like that. But more. They didn't even use that key to password protect anything. So they hadn't password protected the vote database file or secured the audit log. So anyone with access during an election could change votes and alter the logs to erase the evidence. So this machine provided the possibility to fix the election and erase all traces on the way. So afterwards, you have a fixed election and no way to prove that anything went wrong. So we could imagine building something like that, a vote stealing control panel on the machine, and when nobody looks, we call it up and we fix the election up front. So we will have 90% votes for, no, that's votes so far, and we can just set the slider to the number of votes anyone should have. And the interesting thing is, this is not a fictional thing. This actually was done by a couple of people. Ed Felton and his colleagues built this software, and you can look it up in a movie. Security analysis of an electronic voting machine. You can find it on IT Policy, Princeton, Edo. And the interesting thing is that it really works. So you can do the software, you can spread it from one machine to another, exploiting the upgrade mechanism that the machine has. So you come, there's a card that updates the machine to the newest software, and the malware just places itself on this card and it gets taken from one machine to the next. That's what they also showed. But also you can fool the machine in a way so that all self-test runs are positive. The trial election that you stage works out like you planned, and if you start the real election, then a malware comes in, fixes the election, changes the result, and then vanishes again without any trace. It deletes itself, and because it can fix the log files, it doesn't leave any traces. You can find more information about exploits of voting machines in a movie that is quite recent, Hacking Democracy. You can see it on Google Video, interestingly enough, in the full version, where they show how to fix one of these scanner systems, where you actually fill out a paper ballot and you scan it with a machine and the results are fixed. We have another example in Europe, the NetApp machine. This is the NetApp machine. Not all people in the Netherlands dress like the cowboy over there. The NetApp machine was infamous for a number of hacks that were done with it. Hackers said they could play chess on it, and the company maintained that it was a special purpose machine, that you couldn't do anything other than use it as a voting machine. It's not a general purpose computer, it's a special purpose machine. Everything is fixed in there, you cannot change the software. So the Jan Grönendahl, the head of the company of NetApp, said, I would like to witness a proof for the assertion that it's possible to play chess with our voting machines. And this is what they did. They showed him how to play chess on the voting machines. They still have one. They bought it from a community where they didn't want to use it anymore because it was insecure. And there was another thing that happened, so that was the statement from Jan Grönendahl again. Moreover, we explicitly paid attention to the goal that the voting machines work standalone. That is to say that there is no connection with the network, so that an interference from the outside is impossible. What more could you do, is what he's saying. We make the machine totally standalone, there are no interfaces to the outside, you cannot interfere, you cannot listen, you cannot do anything. Hackers don't stand a chance. That's an interesting sentence, because I believe that you should never say that. That's a pure provocation. So that's what they did. Let's just look at the movie. It doesn't need any sound. They have their NetApp machine, which also can play chess. At that time, 90% of all votes in the Netherlands were cast on that machines. You press the button and you press the vote button. And of course it leaks something. It leaks a radio signal.